There is a particular kind of silence that arrives late at night. The house is quiet, the conversations of the day have ended, the lights are off. Yet somewhere in the darkness, a mind is still working. It is calculating. The electricity bill is due next week, the mortgage or rent payment is approaching. The car needs servicing. The children need something for school. There is a credit card balance that has been carried forward for another month. Somewhere in the back of the mind sits the uncomfortable question of whether enough is being saved for the future. And suddenly, money is no longer just money. It becomes a feeling, a tightening in the chest, a restless thought, a quiet comparison with someone who seems to be doing better, a fear about what might happen if income suddenly stops, a sense that perhaps you should have saved more, invested earlier, spent less, earned more, or made different choices. For many people, financial anxiety does not begin when the bank account reaches zero. It begins much earlier. It begins in uncertainty. You can have savings and still worry about money. You can have a respectable salary and still feel financially insecure. You can own a house and still lie awake wondering whether you are falling behind. You can receive a pay rise and discover, strangely, that your worries simply rise with your income. This is because money exists in two places. It exists in the world of numbers, and it exists in the world of the mind. The numbers matter. Bills must be paid. Debt has consequences. Savings create security. Income affects our choices. Pretending otherwise would not bring peace. It would only replace anxiety with denial. But there is another truth. Two people can have almost identical financial circumstances and experience them completely differently. One feels constantly threatened. The other feels cautious but steady. One checks the bank balance repeatedly. The other knows the numbers and continues with the day. One imagines every unexpected expense as the beginning of disaster. The other sees it as a problem that can be addressed. The difference is not always wealth. Sometimes it is the relationship each person has developed with uncertainty. Money anxiety often whispers that peace will arrive later, when the debt is gone, when the salary reaches a certain number, when the investment account becomes large enough, when the house is paid off, when retirement is fully funded, when there is finally enough. But what exactly is enough? If the mind has never learned how to experience enough, perhaps no number can answer that question permanently. This does not mean that financial goals are meaningless. Quite the opposite. A calm relationship with money allows us to pursue those goals more intelligently. We make fewer decisions from panic. We become more patient. We distinguish genuine needs from emotional impulses. We stop asking money to solve problems that money was never designed to solve. Money can buy safety to a certain degree. It can buy options. It can buy time. It can reduce many forms of hardship. But peace with money requires something more subtle. It requires learning how to plan without obsessing, save without becoming afraid to live, spend without drowning in guilt, invest without expecting certainty, and build a future without sacrificing every meaningful part of the present. Perhaps you have experienced something similar. Maybe you have opened your banking app even though you already knew roughly what was there. Maybe a small unexpected expense ruined an otherwise peaceful afternoon. Maybe you have looked at someone else's home, holiday, car, career, or investment success and quietly wondered whether you are somehow behind. Or perhaps your anxiety comes from an earlier chapter of life, when money really was uncertain and part of you still lives as though those difficult days could return at any moment. Whatever your story may be, this journey is not about becoming careless with money. It is about becoming calmer with it. Because financial well-being is not simply the condition of having money. It is the ability to look at your financial life clearly, make thoughtful decisions, prepare for uncertainty, enjoy what you have, and still sleep peacefully at night. So, welcome to another journey with the hopeful narrator. This time, we are exploring something many people spend years chasing without quite knowing how to describe it. Not wealth without limits, not a life without bills, not a future without uncertainty, but something quieter, steadier, and perhaps far more valuable. Money without anxiety, when money stops being only about money. For most of us, our relationship with money began long before we earned our first salary. We learned it by watching. Perhaps you watched your parents discuss bills at the kitchen table. Maybe money was spoken about openly, or perhaps it was surrounded by silence. You may have heard phrases such as, "We can't afford that," or "Money doesn't grow on trees." Perhaps arguments seemed to become louder whenever finances were involved. Or maybe your childhood was financially comfortable. Yet even then, you absorbed certain ideas about what money represented. Success, status, safety, freedom, respect, control. These ideas follow us quietly into adulthood. Consider Daniel. Daniel grew up in a household where money was unpredictable. His father worked irregular jobs, and there were months when everything seemed normal and months when the family struggled. Daniel remembered the uncertainty more clearly than the actual hardship. He remembered watching his mother open envelopes at the dining table. He remembered sensing from her expression whether the contents were good or bad before understanding what the letters meant. He remembered hearing his parents whisper after he had gone to bed. Years later, Daniel became an engineer. He earned well. He saved consistently. He had no major debt except his mortgage. From the outside, his financial life looked stable, but Daniel rarely felt stable. Whenever his bank balance dropped after paying a large bill, he felt uncomfortable. If an unexpected expense appeared, even one he could easily afford, his mood changed. He checked his investment account almost every day. When markets fell, he imagined years of work disappearing. When colleagues discussed expensive holidays, Daniel sometimes judged them for wasting money. Yet underneath that judgment was something else. Fear. Daniel had escaped the financial instability of his childhood, but the instability had not entirely escaped him. This is one of the most important truths about financial anxiety. Sometimes the problem we are reacting to is not entirely in the present. The present merely touches an old memory. The mind learns through repetition. If money was repeatedly associated with conflict, scarcity, embarrassment, or uncertainty, the nervous system may continue treating financial decisions as threats long after circumstances improve. This is why simply earning more does not automatically heal financial fear. Income can change faster than identity. A person can move from scarcity into stability while still carrying the habits of scarcity. They may struggle to spend on reasonable things. They may constantly prepare for disaster. They may feel guilty whenever they enjoy what they have earned. The opposite can happen too. Someone raised in abundance may enter adulthood expecting a lifestyle their income cannot yet support. Spending becomes a way of maintaining an identity. Cutting back feels less like financial adjustment and more like personal failure. There is a quiet lesson hidden here. Before changing our financial lives, it helps to understand the stories we have attached to money. Not because the past determines the future, but because unnamed fears often control us more strongly than understood ones. Daniel eventually noticed something important. His anxiety did not disappear when his savings reached a particular number. Every time he reached a financial milestone, his mind created another. At first, he wanted 3 months of expenses saved, then 6 months, then 12. Then he began wondering whether 2 years would be safer. There was nothing wrong with building reserves. The problem was that Daniel was not building toward a defined sense of security. He was trying to eliminate uncertainty itself. And uncertainty has no price. No bank balance can guarantee that life will unfold exactly as expected. Once Daniel understood this, his approach slowly changed. He still saved, he still invested, he still planned carefully. But he began separating preparation from fear. Preparation said, "I've taken reasonable steps." Fear said, "Take one more step because something terrible might still happen." That distinction changed everything. Perhaps this is the first place where financial peace begins. Not with a number, with awareness. The difference between financial problems and financial fear. There are moments when worrying about money is entirely understandable. If someone cannot meet essential expenses, financial stress is not imaginary. If debt payments are overwhelming income, the problem requires action. If employment is uncertain and there are no savings, concern can be useful because it encourages preparation. But financial fear can continue even when the immediate problem is manageable. This distinction matters. A financial problem asks, what needs to be done? Financial anxiety asks, what if everything goes wrong? One leads toward action, the other often leads toward endless prediction. Maya discovered this after receiving an unexpected repair bill. Her car needed major work, and the cost was far higher than she had anticipated. When the mechanic gave her the estimate, Maya immediately felt her stomach tighten. On the drive home, her thoughts accelerated. There goes this month's savings. What if something else breaks? What if I lose my job? What if I need another major repair next month? By the time she arrived home, one repair bill had somehow become a complete financial catastrophe in her imagination. Yet when Maya finally sat down with the numbers, the situation looked different. She had enough in her emergency fund. Paying the repair would reduce her savings, but it would not create debt. She would need several months to rebuild the account. That was inconvenient. It was disappointing. But it was not a disaster. The problem had a number. The fear had no boundaries. This is why clarity is such a powerful antidote to financial anxiety. The imagination is often most frightening when information is incomplete. A vague fear can feel enormous. A specific problem can often be divided into steps. This principle appears far beyond money. A difficult medical appointment feels terrifying before the facts are known. A challenging project at work feels overwhelming until the tasks are defined. A long journey seems intimidating until the route is mapped. Money behaves similarly. Many people avoid looking closely at their finances because they fear what they might discover. But avoidance rarely produces peace. An unopened bill still exists. An unknown debt balance still accumulates interest. An unclear spending pattern still affects the future. The mind may briefly feel relief by looking away, but uncertainty grows in the background. Maya began developing a simple habit. Whenever money frightened her, she asked herself whether she was dealing with a present problem or a future possibility. If it was a present problem, she looked for the next practical action. If it was only a possibility, she asked whether reasonable preparation already existed. This did not make her fearless. It made her more accurate. And accuracy is often calmer than imagination. There will always be possibilities we cannot completely prepare for. Markets may fall. Jobs may disappear. Expenses may arrive unexpectedly. Economic conditions may change. But financial peace is not the belief that nothing difficult will happen. It is the confidence that difficulty does not automatically mean destruction. Once we understand this, another question naturally appears. If uncertainty cannot be eliminated, how much preparation is enough? The quiet power of knowing you're enough. There is a strange feature of modern financial life. Many people know what they want more of, but fewer know what would actually be enough. More income, more savings, a larger investment portfolio, a better house, a newer car, more passive income, more financial freedom. None of these desires is inherently wrong, but without a definition of enough, progress can become an endless road. Priya learned this after several successful years in her career. When she first started working, her financial ambitions were simple. She wanted to pay her bills without asking anyone for help. Then she wanted some savings. Then she wanted to travel once a year. As her career progressed, her income increased significantly. Yet instead of feeling more secure, Priya began comparing herself with people who earned even more. A colleague purchased an investment property. Another upgraded to a luxury vehicle. Someone else talked about retiring at 45. Priya began wondering whether she was wasting time. Her financial goals expanded almost without her noticing. She started checking property prices late at night. She watched investment videos during lunch. She calculated hypothetical retirement numbers repeatedly. The future became a permanent project. One evening, while having dinner with an old friend, Priya complained that she felt financially behind. Her friend looked surprised. Behind what? Priya had no immediate answer. Behind people her age? Behind colleagues? Behind some imagined version of where she thought she should be? That simple question stayed with her. Behind what? Comparison creates a race without a finish line because there will almost always be someone with more. More income, more property, more impressive investments, more visible success. If peace depends on reaching the front of that race, peace becomes nearly impossible. This is why defining enough is not a rejection of ambition. It is a boundary around ambition. Enough does not mean refusing growth. It means knowing what growth is for. Perhaps enough means having several months of expenses available for emergencies. Perhaps it means being free from high-interest debt. Perhaps it means being able to support your family, take a modest holiday, save consistently, and still enjoy ordinary life. Perhaps it means building enough wealth to reduce working hours later. The number will differ for everyone. But the principle remains. Money becomes calmer when it has a purpose. Without purpose, accumulation can become emotional insurance against every possible future. And no amount is sufficient for that task. There is a quiet freedom in saying, I would like more, but I do not need more in order to believe that my life has begun. That sentence changes the relationship between the present and the future. Because one of the hidden costs of financial anxiety is that it can make today feel like a waiting room. We tell ourselves that life will become enjoyable after the next milestone, after the debt, after the promotion, after the house, after the investment target, after retirement. But years can disappear while we wait for permission to feel secure. And this leads us toward one of the most difficult financial skills of all. Learning to prepare for tomorrow without abandoning today. Saving for tomorrow without becoming afraid of today. Saving is usually described as a financial habit. But emotionally, saving can mean many different things. For one person, saving represents freedom. For another, responsibility. For another, fear. For another, control. There is a difference between saving because you value your future and saving because you are frightened of living in the present. Thomas discovered this distinction gradually. He was exceptionally disciplined with money. Every month, a large percentage of his salary went directly into savings and investments. He rarely bought anything unnecessary. He compared prices carefully and avoided debt. His friends admired his discipline. But Thomas had a problem. He struggled to enjoy money even when he could afford to spend it. When his wife suggested a weekend trip for their anniversary, Thomas immediately calculated the cost. When his children wanted to visit an attraction during school holidays, he thought about how much the same money might become if invested for 20 years. He was not trying to be difficult. He genuinely believed he was protecting his family. But slowly, his family began experiencing his financial discipline as emotional absence. One evening, his daughter asked why they always talked about doing things one day. One day we will travel. One day we will relax. One day we will spend more time together. One day. Thomas realized that he had become excellent at funding the future while repeatedly postponing the present. This does not mean that every desire should be satisfied. A peaceful financial life requires limits. But there is a difference between thoughtful restraint and permanent deprivation. Money saved for the future has value. Money used to create meaningful experiences can have value too. The challenge is not choosing one over the other. It is learning how to honor both. Imagine financial life as a bridge between two versions of yourself. The person you are today and the person you will become years from now. If you spend everything today, the future version of you may inherit unnecessary difficulty. But if you sacrifice every meaningful experience today, the future version of you may inherit money, along with memories of a life repeatedly postponed. Balance does not mean perfect equality, Some seasons require more saving. Some seasons require rebuilding. Some seasons allow greater enjoyment. The important question is whether your financial choices reflect your values or merely your fears. Thomas did not abandon his savings plan. He simply created space for living. He and his wife agreed on an amount that could be spent each year on experiences without guilt. Once that money had been intentionally assigned for enjoyment, Thomas stopped mentally treating every restaurant meal or family outing as a threat to retirement. The numbers had not changed dramatically. His relationship with the numbers had. Sometimes financial peace comes from giving money permission to perform different jobs. Some money protects, some money grows, some money pays obligations, and some money is allowed to become life. Once this balance begins to emerge, another source of anxiety becomes easier to see. The constant pressure of comparison, the expensive habit of comparing lives. Financial comparison existed long before social media. People have always noticed the homes, clothes, land, possessions, and lifestyles of others, but never before have we been invited to compare ourselves with so many people, so frequently. A few minutes on a phone can expose us to luxury holidays, renovated homes, investment success stories, expensive restaurants, new cars, career promotions, and carefully framed versions of financial abundance. What we rarely see is the complete balance sheet behind the image. We see the car. We do not see the loan. We see the holiday. We do not see the credit card statement. We see the successful investment. We do not see the losses that came before it. We see the beautiful house. We do not know the mortgage, family assistance, inheritance, income, or sacrifices behind it. Comparison gives us fragments and encourages us to imagine the rest. Aaron learned this during a period when many of his friends seemed to be moving ahead financially. One bought a larger house, another started a business, another posted photographs from overseas several times a year. Aaron and his wife were living carefully while paying down debt and building savings. Their progress was real but visually unimpressive. There were no photographs of emergency funds. No one posted pictures celebrating a reduced credit card balance. There were no glamorous updates about increasing retirement contributions. Financial stability is often quiet. Financial consumption is visible. That difference can distort our perception of success. Aaron began feeling embarrassed by his older car. Nothing was wrong with it. It was reliable, fully paid for, and inexpensive to maintain. But suddenly, it felt like evidence that he was behind. He started researching replacements. For several weeks, he imagined himself driving something newer. Then he asked himself a useful question. If nobody else could ever see this car, would I still want to replace it? The answer surprised him. Not yet. That question saved him from making a purchase motivated primarily by comparison. Perhaps you have experienced something similar. Maybe there was something you were perfectly satisfied with until you saw someone else's version. A phone, a kitchen, a salary, a holiday, a home, a career. Comparison can turn enough into insufficient within seconds. And because financial anxiety thrives on the feeling of falling behind, comparison becomes one of its favorite sources of fuel. The solution is not to become indifferent to everyone around us. Other people's success can inspire us. Their choices can teach us. But inspiration says, that possibility interests me. Comparison says, their progress reduces the value of mine. Those are very different messages. Your financial life is built from your income, responsibilities, values, opportunities, history, family circumstances, and goals. Someone else's timeline cannot measure it accurately. Once Aaron understood this, he began paying more attention to invisible progress. Debt reduced, savings increased, more choices available, less dependence on the next paycheck, greater ability to handle emergencies. Those things did not photograph well, but they allowed him to sleep better. And sleep, he discovered, was worth more than looking successful. Why control can become another form of anxiety. Planning is helpful. Budgets are helpful. Tracking spending can be helpful. Knowing where money goes creates awareness. But almost any useful financial habit can become unhealthy when it turns into an attempt to control every detail of life. Elena tracked everything: coffee, fuel, groceries, subscriptions, entertainment. Every purchase was categorized. At first, this helped her understand her spending. Then something changed. She began checking her budget several times a day. If she spent slightly more on groceries than expected, she became irritated. If a friend invited her to an unplanned lunch, she struggled to enjoy it because the expense had not been anticipated. Her financial system was supposed to give her control. Instead, she had become controlled by the system. This is a subtle form of anxiety because it often disguises itself as responsibility. The spreadsheet looks organized, the savings account looks healthy, the bills are paid, but internally there is little flexibility. Life does not behave like a spreadsheet. Prices change. Children need things unexpectedly. Cars break. Friends visit. Opportunities appear. Plans change. A financial system that cannot tolerate ordinary unpredictability may create more anxiety than it removes. This is why a good financial plan needs margins. Not only mathematical margins, emotional margins, a little room for life to be life. Elena eventually stopped trying to make every month perfect. She created broader spending categories and allowed small amounts of unplanned spending without treating them as failures. The result was interesting. She did not suddenly become irresponsible. She became less obsessed. This is an important psychological principle. When rules are excessively rigid, breaking a small rule can feel like losing control completely. But flexible boundaries are easier to maintain over time. The goal of financial organization is not perfection. It is direction. A budget is not a moral report card. Spending slightly more than planned does not mean you are bad with money. Saving slightly less one month does not erase years of good decisions. A temporary setback is not a new identity. When we stop demanding financial perfection from ourselves, we become more capable of making consistent decisions, and consistency matters far more than perfection. This becomes especially important when we face something even less controllable than monthly expenses. The uncertain world of investing. Investing without demanding certainty. Investing can create wealth. It can also create anxiety. The same market that appears exciting when prices rise can feel terrifying when they fall. For many people, the emotional challenge of investing is greater than the mathematical one. Samuel discovered this after beginning to invest seriously in his 30s. At first, he felt proud every time his portfolio increased. He began checking it daily. Then several investments declined sharply. Samuel knew intellectually that markets fluctuate, but knowing something intellectually and experiencing it emotionally are different. Each morning, he checked the numbers. Some days, his investments fell further. He began imagining the money as hours of his life disappearing, months of work, years of savings. He considered selling everything simply to stop the discomfort. This is where financial anxiety can become expensive. Fear does not merely create unpleasant feelings. It can influence decisions. When people demand certainty from an uncertain system, they often move between excitement and panic. They buy when optimism feels safest. They sell when fear becomes unbearable. The emotional cycle can become the opposite of patient investing. History repeatedly shows that economies, industries, and markets move through periods of optimism and fear. Prosperity encourages confidence. Declines remind people that risk never disappeared. The lesson is not that markets always behave kindly. They do not. The lesson is that uncertainty is part of investing, not evidence that investing has suddenly stopped working. Samuel eventually changed one important habit. He stopped watching his portfolio every day. His investments had been chosen for long-term goals, yet he had been measuring them with a 24-hour emotional clock. The mismatch was creating unnecessary distress. If the purpose of money is 10 or 20 years away, today's movement may contain very little useful information. This idea extends beyond markets. Many financial decisions require patience. Building savings, reducing debt, growing a business, advancing in a career, developing financial knowledge. Compounding is slow before it becomes impressive. The early years can feel almost disappointing. A small investment grows by a small amount. Debt decreases gradually. Savings accumulate quietly. Then time begins doing more of the work. Financial anxiety dislikes slow progress because anxiety wants immediate evidence that everything will be okay. But some of the most important forms of financial security are built quietly. Samuel learned to judge his strategy by whether it still matched his goals and risk tolerance, not by whether every week felt comfortable. He could not control markets. He could control his decisions, and that distinction created a deeper kind of confidence. The freedom hidden. Inside an emergency fund. There is a reason unexpected expenses feel so emotionally powerful. They remind us that life does not ask permission before changing. A washing machine stops working. A dental bill appears. A flight must be booked unexpectedly. A job ends sooner than expected. The amount may vary, but the emotional message is often the same. You are not expecting this. An emergency fund does something interesting. It does not prevent emergencies. It changes their meaning. Rachel discovered this when her employer announced restructuring. Several positions were being removed, including hers. Years earlier, the news would have terrified her. But over the previous few years, Rachel had slowly built a financial reserve. It had not been exciting. There had been no dramatic moment. She simply transferred money regularly whenever she was paid. When she lost her job, she was still disappointed. She worried about the future. But underneath the uncertainty was something she had never experienced during previous financial difficulties. Time. She did not need to accept the first available job immediately. She could think. She could update her skills. She could attend interviews without feeling that every rejection threatened next week's groceries. Her savings had purchased something far more valuable than a product. They had purchased breathing room. This is why financial security is not always about becoming wealthy. Sometimes it is about increasing the distance between a problem and a crisis. Without savings, a small problem can become debt. With some savings, the same problem may remain only an inconvenience. The amount required will differ depending on responsibilities, income stability, household circumstances, and expenses. But the psychological benefit begins before the fund becomes large. Every small reserve says not every unexpected event needs to become an emergency. There is also an important balance here. An emergency fund should create security, not become another endless target driven by fear. At some point, reasonable preparation has been made. Beyond that point, additional saving may still be useful, but it should serve a defined purpose. Rachel's reserve did not guarantee that she would find another job quickly. It simply gave her options while she searched. And options are one of the most powerful things money can provide. Money cannot control life, but it can sometimes create enough space for us to respond to life more thoughtfully. That leads to another source of anxiety that often hides behind ordinary purchases. Guilt, spending without guilt. Some people struggle because they spend too easily. Others struggle because they cannot spend comfortably at all. Financial advice often focuses on overspending, but guilt around reasonable spending can be equally revealing. Nina had always been careful. She worked hard, saved regularly, and rarely bought expensive things for herself. One year, after months of planning, she decided to take her mother on a trip. Her mother was getting older, and they had often spoken about traveling together. Nina could afford the trip. She had savings. She had no high-interest debt. Her regular financial commitments were covered. Yet after booking the tickets, she felt guilty. For days she calculated what the money could have become if invested instead. The trip had not even started, and she was already turning a meaningful experience into a financial mistake. Why? Because somewhere along the way, Nina had developed the belief that saving was always responsible and spending was always suspicious. But money has no virtue simply because it remains untouched. The purpose of responsible financial management is not to die with the highest possible balance. It is to use resources wisely across an entire life. Sometimes wisdom means saving. Sometimes it means saying no. Sometimes it means investing. And sometimes it means spending money on something that deeply matters. Nina eventually took the trip. Years later, after her mother was no longer able to travel easily, Nina understood the decision differently. The money had not disappeared. It had changed form. It became mornings they remembered. Conversations they would never repeat in quite the same way. Photographs, laughter, time together. Of course, this idea can be misused. Not every impulsive purchase becomes a meaningful memory simply because we call it an experience. Financial peace requires honesty, but it also requires recognizing that money is a tool rather than a score. A tool is useful when it helps create the life we value. Perhaps the question is not simply, can I afford this? Nor is it always, could this money grow if I saved it? Sometimes the better question is, does this spending belong in the life I'm trying to build? When spending aligns with values and fits within our means, guilt has less reason to remain. And when spending does not align with our values, the problem becomes clearer too. We begin to understand the difference between enjoyment and emotional consumption. When spending becomes emotional medicine, there are moments when we do not buy something because we need it. We buy because we need to feel something. Relief, excitement, reward, control, belonging. A difficult weekend and shopping feels like compensation. A stressful day creates the desire for expensive food. A disappointing event produces the urge to buy something new. There is nothing unusual about this. Human beings often use external experiences to change internal states. But when spending repeatedly becomes emotional medicine, financial anxiety can enter a cycle. Stress leads to spending. Spending creates temporary relief. Later, the bank balance creates more stress, and the cycle begins again. Marcus knew this pattern well. Whenever work became difficult, he rewarded himself. New electronics, clothes, restaurant meals, weekend purchases. Individually, none seemed disastrous. But together, they prevented him from building savings. Marcus often told himself that he deserved the purchases because he worked hard. And perhaps he did deserve enjoyment. The deeper question was whether the purchases were actually giving him what he needed. One Saturday, Marcus bought an expensive watch after a particularly difficult week. For several hours, he felt excited. By Monday, the feeling had faded. The work problem remained. The watch had solved nothing. This is not a story about watches. It is about asking money to perform emotional work. Money is powerful, but its emotional effects are often temporary. A purchase can provide pleasure. It cannot permanently provide self-worth. A larger house can provide comfort. It cannot guarantee a peaceful family. A luxury item can create excitement. It cannot create lasting confidence. When we ask money to solve emotional problems, we often need repeated spending because the underlying need remains. Marcus began experimenting with a pause, not a rigid rule, just time. Whenever he wanted to make an unplanned purchase after a stressful event, he waited. Sometimes he still bought the item later. Often he discovered that the desire had disappeared. The pause helped him distinguish wanting the object from wanting the feeling associated with buying it. That small distinction transformed his finances. He did not become someone who never enjoyed money. He became someone who understood what money could and could not do. And once we understand that, we can begin confronting one of the heaviest emotional burdens connected with finances: past mistakes. Making peace with financial mistakes. Almost everyone who manages money for long enough eventually makes a decision they regret. An investment that failed. Debt that grew too large. A purchase that was unnecessary. A business decision made too quickly. Savings that should have started earlier. An opportunity missed. Financial regret has a special kind of pain because the numbers make the mistake feel measurable. We can calculate what the lost money might have become. We can imagine an alternative life. If only I had invested then. If only I had not sold. If only I had bought that property. If only I had avoided that debt. But hindsight has information that the earlier version of us did not possess. Leo learned this after losing money in an investment he barely understood. A friend had told him about an opportunity that seemed promising. Other people appeared to be making money quickly. Leo feared missing out. He invested more than he should have. Months later, the investment collapsed. For years, Leo replayed the decision. He calculated how much the money would have grown elsewhere. He became so afraid of making another mistake that he stopped investing completely. The first mistake cost him money. The years of fear afterward cost him opportunity. This is how regret can multiply itself. A painful decision from the past begins controlling decisions in the present. Eventually, Leo recognized that the loss had already charged its financial price. He did not need to keep paying emotional interest. He studied what had happened. He realized that he had invested based on excitement rather than understanding. He had concentrated too much money in one place. He had mistaken other people's confidence for evidence. Those lessons were expensive, but they were useful. The purpose of examining a mistake is not to punish the person who made it. It is to educate the person who comes after it. That person is you. Older, more experienced, better informed. Financial peace does not require a perfect history. It requires refusing to let imperfect history become permanent identity. You're not necessarily bad with money because you once made a bad financial decision. You're not irresponsible forever because you once carried too much debt. You're not doomed because you started saving later than you wish you had. The best moment may have been earlier. But earlier is unavailable. Today is not. There is something deeply hopeful about that. Financial progress does not ask whether your beginning was perfect. It asks what direction you are moving now. Why more income does not always create more peace. It seems logical that earning more should reduce financial anxiety. And sometimes it does. For households struggling to cover essential needs, increased income can make an enormous difference. But after a certain point, another phenomenon often appears. Expenses grow with income. Expectations grow. Lifestyle expands. The definition of normal changes. James experienced this throughout his career. When he earned a modest salary, he believed that earning twice as much would solve nearly every financial worry. Eventually, he did earn twice as much, then considerably more. But his lifestyle changed too. A larger home, a newer car, more expensive holidays, private activities for the children. Subscriptions and services that once would have seemed luxurious gradually became ordinary. James was earning far more than his younger self had imagined. Yet he still felt dependent on every paycheck. This is sometimes called lifestyle inflation, but underneath the financial term is a psychological pattern. Human beings adapt. What once felt luxurious becomes normal. What once felt sufficient begins feeling restrictive. This adaptability helps us survive difficult circumstances, but it can also make satisfaction difficult to hold. If every increase in income immediately becomes an increase in lifestyle, financial breathing room never appears. The numbers become larger. The anxiety remains. James eventually began measuring financial progress differently, not only by income, by margin. How much space existed between what he earned and what his lifestyle required? That question changed his perspective. Someone earning less with substantial financial margin may have greater flexibility than someone earning far more whose commitments consume almost everything. Margin creates choices. the ability to save, the ability to change jobs, the ability to handle setbacks, the ability to help someone, the ability to rest, the ability to say no. This is why financial freedom is not merely about how much money flows into your life. It is also about how much of your life is required to maintain the way you live. There is nothing wrong with enjoying increased income. The goal is not to freeze your lifestyle forever. The goal is to make sure that every improvement in income does not quietly become another obligation. Because sometimes the most valuable thing a pay rise can purchase is not a better object. It is more space. Talking about money without shame. Money is strangely private. People may discuss relationships, careers, health, politics, and personal struggles while avoiding honest conversations about finances. Part of this comes from shame. People fear being judged for earning too little, or for spending too much, or for having debt, or for not understanding investing, or even for having more money than others. This silence can make financial anxiety heavier. Claire and Ben had been married for 8 years, but they rarely discussed money calmly. They talked about bills when bills were due. They talked about spending when one of them was upset. They talked about savings when something went wrong. Money conversations became associated with tension. Claire believed Ben spent too freely. Ben believed Claire worried excessively. Neither felt understood. One evening, after another argument about an unexpected purchase, they realized something important. They were not really arguing about the purchase. Claire was arguing for security. Ben was arguing for freedom. Both values mattered. But because they had never named them, every financial disagreement felt personal. Once they began discussing what money represented to each of them, the conversations changed. Claire explained that uncertainty frightened her because of experiences from childhood. Ben explained that excessive restriction made him feel that life was always being postponed. They did not suddenly agree on everything, but disagreement became easier when each understood what the other was protecting. Many financial conflicts are not actually conflicts about arithmetic. They are conflicts about values, safety versus enjoyment, present versus future, independence versus shared responsibility, generosity versus caution. Understanding this can transform conversations. Instead of asking, "Why did you spend that?" we may begin asking, "What matters to us here?" Instead of saying, "You worry too much," we may ask, "What would help you feel reasonably secure?" Money becomes less threatening when it can be discussed without accusation. This is true within families, partnerships, and even within our own minds. Shame prefers secrecy. Wisdom prefers clarity. When we can look directly at our financial reality without turning it into a judgment about our worth, change becomes easier. And this brings us to perhaps the deepest misunderstanding of all. The belief that our financial position tells us who we are. Your net worth is not your human worth. Numbers are useful because they simplify information. Income, debt, savings, assets, expenses, returns. These numbers help us make decisions. But problems begin when financial numbers become emotional measurements of identity. A high income can create pride. A low income can create embarrassment. A successful investment can make someone feel intelligent. A loss can make them feel foolish. A promotion can feel like proof of value. Unemployment can feel like evidence of failure, but money measures financial conditions. It does not measure human worth. David understood this only after losing a senior position he had held for many years. His identity had become closely connected to his career. He was the successful one, the provider, the person others asked for advice. When the company restructured, David suddenly found himself without the title that had defined much of his adult life. Financially, he was reasonably prepared. Emotionally, he was devastated. He avoided social gatherings because he did not want people asking what he was doing. He felt ashamed spending money even though his household had savings. The deeper loss was not salary. It was identity. Over time, David began realizing how much of his self-respect had been outsourced to his job title and income. This realization was uncomfortable, but it was also freeing. A career can be meaningful. Providing for others can be deeply important. Financial achievement can represent discipline, creativity, and years of effort. But none of these things contains the whole person. David was still a father, still a husband, still a friend. Still someone with experience, humor, patience, skills, memories, and the ability to contribute. His income had changed. His humanity had not. This matters because financial anxiety often becomes most intense when money is connected to identity. If losing money means becoming less worthy, every financial risk becomes terrifying. If someone else's success means your failure, comparison becomes unavoidable. If earning more is required to prove that you matter, enough can never arrive. There is a quiet lesson hidden here. Money can measure many things, but it cannot measure the most important parts of a life. Once we stop asking money to prove our worth, we become freer to use it wisely. The calm strength of a simple financial life. Complexity can sometimes create the appearance of sophistication. Multiple accounts, numerous investments, constant financial news, complicated strategies, endless optimization. But complexity is not always wisdom. Sometimes simplicity creates greater peace. Grace discovered this after years of trying to make the perfect financial decisions. She followed market commentary.
She switched strategies.
She searched constantly for better returns. She compared savings accounts, investment products, mortgage options, and financial forecasts. She was informed, but she was exhausted. Every decision seemed to contain an opportunity cost. If she chose one investment, perhaps another would perform better. If she paid extra toward the mortgage, perhaps investing would have been wiser. If she invested, perhaps markets would fall. If she kept cash, perhaps inflation would reduce its value. There was always another possibility. Eventually, Grace accepted something that perfectionism had prevented her from seeing. There may be several reasonable financial decisions available at the same time. Not every choice has one perfect answer. Sometimes a good plan followed consistently is more valuable than a theoretically perfect plan constantly changed. Grace simplified. She automated regular saving. She kept an emergency reserve. She used a diversified, long-term investment approach she understood. She reviewed her finances periodically rather than continuously. She stopped trying to win every financial decision. And something surprising happened. Her financial life became quieter. That quietness allowed her to focus on work, family, health, friendships, and ordinary days. This may be one of the greatest signs of financial well-being. Money begins occupying less mental space, not because it has become unimportant, because it has become organized enough to stop demanding constant attention. A good financial system should support your life. Your life should not exist to support your financial system. Trusting your ability to adapt. Much of financial anxiety comes from imagining the future while forgetting something important. The future version of you will also be there. When we imagine a financial crisis, we often imagine ourselves frozen exactly as we are today. We forget that we can respond, adjust, learn, earn differently, reduce expenses, ask for help, change plans, solve problems. This does not mean every hardship is easy. Some financial setbacks are deeply painful, but human beings are often more adaptable than anxiety allows us to remember. Consider Aisha, whose small business lost a major client unexpectedly. For several days, she felt overwhelmed. That client represented a significant portion of her income. Her first thoughts were catastrophic. What if the business failed? What if she had to close? What if years of effort had been wasted? Then the initial shock settled. Aisha began responding. She contacted previous clients. She revised her services. She reduced unnecessary business expenses. She pursued smaller contracts she had previously ignored. The following months were difficult, but gradually the business became less dependent on a single client. The event she had feared as the end became the beginning of a more resilient model. This does not mean every setback contains a hidden gift. Sometimes a loss is simply a loss. But even then, the future is rarely as passive as anxiety imagines. When we worry, we often ask, what if something goes wrong? A more complete question might be, if something goes wrong, what might I be capable of doing? That second question does not deny risk. It remembers agency. Financial confidence is not certainty about circumstances. It is trust in your capacity to respond to circumstances. You have solved problems before. You have learned things you once did not know. You have adjusted to changes you did not choose. You have survived expensive mistakes, difficult seasons, unexpected bills, career changes, disappointments, and uncertainty. Perhaps not perfectly, but you are still here. Preparation matters, savings matter, insurance matters, planning matters. But somewhere alongside all those practical protections, we also need trust. Trust that if life changes, we can change with it, letting money return to its proper place. There is a strange paradox in financial well-being. We need to take money seriously without allowing it to become the center of life. Ignoring money creates problems. Obsessing over money creates different problems. Somewhere between those extremes lies a healthier relationship. Money deserves attention, not worship. It deserves planning, not constant fear. It deserves respect, not the power to determine whether a day is meaningful. Perhaps you know someone who had very little money but created a warm home. Perhaps you have known someone with substantial wealth who remained deeply restless. These examples do not prove that money is irrelevant. They remind us that money and peace are related, but they are not identical. Financial resources can reduce many forms of stress. Yet beyond a certain point, peace depends increasingly on how we relate to what we have. Can we enjoy something without immediately comparing it? Can we experience an unexpected expense without turning it into a prophecy? Can we save for the future without fearing the present? Can we spend intentionally without guilt? Can we watch someone else succeed without interpreting their success as evidence that we are behind? Can we make a mistake without converting it into identity? These are not accounting questions. They are life questions. And perhaps that is why money can teach us so much about ourselves. It reveals our fears, our hopes, our impatience, our desire for control, our need for approval, our relationship with uncertainty, our definition of enough. Money becomes a mirror. And once we understand what the mirror is showing us, we no longer need to fight every reflection. Closing message. Perhaps financial peace begins with a smaller idea than we imagine. Not becoming rich enough to guarantee that nothing difficult will ever happen. Not discovering the perfect investment. Not predicting every economic change. Not reaching a magical number after which worry permanently disappears. Perhaps it begins with learning to say, I know where I stand. I know what matters to me. I am preparing for what I reasonably can. And I will not spend my entire life being frightened by everything I cannot predict. Money will continue moving through your life. Some years may bring more. Others may bring less. There may be seasons of growth and seasons of rebuilding. There may be opportunities you recognize and others you miss. There will probably be purchases you later regret and decisions you are grateful you made. There may be investments that rise beautifully and others that disappoint you. There will be moments when you feel financially confident and moments when old fears return. Peace does not require those fluctuations to disappear. It requires learning not to disappear inside them. Remember Daniel, who discovered that his growing savings could never eliminate every uncertainty. He learned that preparation has a point where it must eventually become trust. Remember Maya, whose unexpected repair bill became a catastrophe in her imagination until she sat down and looked at the actual numbers. She discovered that a problem with boundaries is often easier to carry than a fear without boundaries. Remember Priya, who believed she was financially behind until someone asked the simple question, behind what? She discovered that comparison had placed her in a race she had never consciously chosen. Remember Thomas, who became so committed to protecting the future that he nearly forgot the people living with him in the present? He learned that money can serve tomorrow without stealing today. Remember Aaron and the older car that suddenly seemed inadequate only because he had begun measuring it against other people's lives. He discovered that some of the most important forms of financial progress are invisible. Remember Elena, whose perfect budget began controlling her rather than helping her. She learned that a healthy financial system needs room for imperfect months and unpredictable life. Remember Samuel, who watched his investments so frequently that long-term goals became daily emotional events. He learned that patience is not inactivity. Sometimes patience is disciplined distance. Remember Rachel, whose emergency fund could not prevent job loss, but gave her something almost as valuable as income: time, breathing room, choices. Remember Nina, who felt guilty about spending money on a meaningful journey with her mother. She discovered that wisely used money does not always disappear. Sometimes it becomes memory. Remember Marcus, who realized that many of his purchases were attempts to change feelings rather than improve his life. He learned that not every emotional need has a financial solution. Remember Leo, who paid for one investment mistake twice, first with money and then with years of fear. He eventually understood that mistakes should become teachers, not permanent judges. Remember James, whose income grew while his financial breathing room remained small. He discovered that freedom often lives in the distance between what we earn and what we require. Remember Claire and Ben, who learned that arguments about money were often arguments about something deeper: security, freedom, fear, hope. Once those values were understood, the numbers became easier to discuss. Remember David, who lost a job and briefly felt that he had lost his worth with it. He discovered that income can measure financial circumstances, but it cannot measure a human life. Remember Grace, who spent years searching for perfect financial decisions before discovering the peace of a good, simple system followed consistently. And remember Aisha, whose business setback reminded her that uncertainty is not the same thing as helplessness. She could respond. So can you. Perhaps you have experienced something similar. Maybe you have been carrying financial anxiety for years without ever calling it by that name. Maybe you believed it was simply responsibility. Maybe you thought everyone checked their accounts repeatedly, worried about distant possibilities, compared themselves with others, or felt guilty whenever they spent money. Maybe there was a time when financial fear protected you. Perhaps life really was uncertain. Perhaps money really was scarce. Perhaps you had to be careful because there was no safety net. If so, those habits may once have served an important purpose. But sometimes we carry survival strategies into seasons where they are no longer required in the same way. A person who once needed to watch every dollar may later need to learn that enjoying some of those dollars is also allowed. A person who once made serious financial mistakes may need to learn that caution does not have to become paralysis. A person who grew up around financial uncertainty may need to remind themselves that today's circumstances are not yesterday's circumstances. And a person who has spent years chasing financial success may eventually need to ask what the success was supposed to make possible, because money is most useful when it serves something beyond itself. A safe home, time with people you love, the ability to leave a harmful situation, education, opportunity, generosity, rest, experiences, independence, dignity, choice, the ability to wake tomorrow without feeling that one small problem could destroy everything. These are the deeper things money can support, but money does not need to dominate the mind in order to perform those roles. You can care about your finances without thinking about them constantly. You can pursue wealth without believing that wealth determines your worth. You can want more without despising what you already have. You can prepare for difficult possibilities without living emotionally inside them before they happen. You can be ambitious and grateful at the same time. You can save and still live. You can spend and still be responsible. You can invest and still accept uncertainty. You can make mistakes and still become wise. And perhaps, most importantly, you can build a better financial future without treating the present as something that must merely be endured until that future arrives. There will always be another financial milestone available. Another target, another opportunity, another person who appears to be ahead, another article telling you that you need more, another prediction about what could go wrong, another reason to postpone peace. At some point, we must decide that peace cannot remain permanently conditional. You can still improve, you can still build, you can still dream. But you do not have to wait until every financial question has been answered before allowing yourself to experience a good day. One day, perhaps many years from now, you may look back and realize that some of the things you worried about never happened. Other things happened that you never thought to worry about. You solved some problems easily. Others took time. You made good decisions. You made imperfect ones. Money came. Money went. Plans changed. Life changed. And somehow, through all of it, you continued. Maybe that is the kind of security we are really searching for. Not the certainty that life will never shake us, but the quiet confidence that we do not have to spend our days trembling before it does. So build your savings, reduce the debts that burden you. Invest patiently when it suits your circumstances. Understand your spending, protect yourself where you reasonably can. Create financial margin, learn from mistakes. Talk openly with the people who share your financial life. Know what enough means for you, and then remember to look up from the numbers. There is a life happening around them. There are conversations that will never appear on a bank statement. There are ordinary evenings that will someday become memories. There are people whose presence is worth more than the things you might buy to impress them. There are mornings you do not need to earn. There is laughter that does not compound financially but becomes more valuable with time. There is a version of wealth that cannot be calculated. And perhaps the wisest relationship with money is one that helps us recognize that wealth rather than distracting us from it. Money matters. But it does not deserve every thought. The future matters. But it does not deserve the whole present. Preparation matters. But certainty was never available. So may you build carefully without living fearfully. May you save without becoming afraid to spend on what truly matters. May you pursue progress without turning someone else's success into evidence of your failure. May you make financial decisions from clarity more often than from panic. May you forgive the mistakes that taught you something. May you recognize the progress that nobody else can see. And when uncertainty arrives, as it eventually does in every life, may you remember that security is not only what sits inside an account. It is also what has grown inside you, your experience, your judgment, your adaptability, your patience, your ability to begin again, your understanding of what truly matters. Perhaps that is where money without anxiety finally begins. Not when you have enough money to control the future, but when you have enough wisdom to know that you never needed to control all of it in order to live well today. And when money finally returns to its proper place, important, useful, respected, but no longer allowed to rule every quiet corner of the mind,